The knock on the door. Rebecca Carter sat in the quiet of her living room. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant echo of Noah's toys scattered across the floor, the only sounds in the otherwise still house. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel like it was frozen in time. But inside her, the clock had been ticking relentlessly for days, ever since that call, that fateful moment when everything she had known and loved was shattered. She had known the risks. As the wife of a soldier, Rebecca had learned early on how to live with the constant uncertainty that came with being married to someone whose job was to face danger every day. Her husband, Captain James Carter, had been in the Army for over a decade. They had met in college, fallen in love quickly, and married even quicker. Their life together had been a whirlwind of love, adventure, and sacrifices. But the reality of a military life had always loomed over them like an ever-present storm cloud. The deployments, the long absences, the times when they said goodbye and didn't know when, or if, they would be together again. Rebecca had accepted it, as many military spouses did, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment when she heard those words. "We regret to inform you." That morning, the knock on the door had come just as the sun was rising, casting a dim light through the blinds of their home. The officer standing on her doorstep had removed his cap and stood at attention, his face tight, betraying the news he had to deliver. Another officer stood behind him, both of them holding the weight of something far too heavy for her to comprehend. "Ma'am, we regret to inform you," he had said, his voice cracking ever so slightly. Captain James Carter was killed in action during a mission in Iraq. Rebecca had stared at him, her mind struggling to make sense of the words. She heard them. She understood them, but they didn't make any sense. Jim, gone. It couldn't be true. It wasn't possible. Her body went numb. The world around her began to blur, and she couldn't remember much after that. Her legs gave out, and the officer had caught her before she could fall. The world felt like it was spinning, until she realized Noah, their 1-year-old son, was inside. She quickly pulled herself together, somehow finding the strength to nod and listen, but her heart was already shattering. The thought of Noah growing up without a father was almost too much to bear. The next few days were a blur. Arrangements for the funeral, the condolences, the overwhelming outpouring of sympathy from family, friends, and even strangers who had known Jim. The funeral itself was a somber affair, attended by military personnel, fellow soldiers, and civilians who had admired Captain Carter for his bravery. Rebecca clung to Noah during the ceremony, as if holding on to him was the only way she could keep a part of Jim with her. The flag that was draped over his coffin was the only thing that remained of him now. His body had been taken by the war, but his memory would live on in the hearts of those who loved him. During the service, there were speeches about Jim's courage, his leadership, his unwavering commitment to his comrades. They spoke of how Jim had always put others first, a man of honor, a man who had laid down his life for the freedom of others. The words echoed in Rebecca's mind, but all she could think of was how she was going to explain to Noah, one day, who his father had been and why he was never coming home. At the reception afterward, one of Jim's friends from the Army approached her with a kind smile. His name was Sergeant Michael Donovan, and he had served alongside Jim for several years. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a face that was weathered from too many years in combat. His eyes were filled with empathy as he spoke. "Rebecca," he began, his voice low and steady, "Jim was proud of you. Proud of everything you stood for. He spoke about you and Noah all the time. He loved you both so much." "Thank you," Rebecca whispered, fighting to hold back the tears. The words were kind, but they didn't ease the ache in her heart. She knew Jim had been proud of their family, but it didn't make the pain any easier to bear. As the night drew to a close and people began to filter out, Rebecca found herself standing alone in the middle of the living room. The house felt different now, empty in a way that she couldn't explain. Jim's absence was suffocating, and the silence was deafening. That's when she noticed the laptop. Jim's old laptop sat on the desk in their bedroom, the same one he had used for work, for writing emails, for catching up on news when he was home. Rebecca hadn't thought about it in the chaos of the past few days. But now, sitting there in the stillness of the house, it caught her attention. She walked toward it, her footsteps almost silent on the carpeted floor. She sat at the desk and powered it up. The screen flickered briefly before it came to life, displaying the desktop she had seen so many times before. Nothing unusual. But then she noticed something she hadn't seen before, a file, hidden deep in the folder labeled Personal. It wasn't like Jim to leave things like this unattended. He was meticulous about organization, always keeping his digital life just as tidy as his physical one. But there it was, a file with her name on it. Rebecca's surprise. Curiosity gnawed at her, and though her mind screamed at her to close it, to leave it alone and not delve deeper into the past, something inside of her urged her to open it. With trembling fingers, she clicked on the file. What she uncovered would change her life in ways she could never have anticipated. The hidden file. Rebecca stared at the laptop screen, her heart pounding as her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The file, clearly named for her, sat innocently enough on the desktop. Rebecca's surprise. The title, so simple, so unassuming, was enough to stir a sense of unease within her. It was too personal, too deliberate for her to ignore. Jim had always been a man of structure, of order, so why would he leave something like this behind, unguarded? With a deep breath, Rebecca clicked on the file. She half expected the screen to flicker, and some kind of warning to pop up, but instead, the folder opened smoothly, revealing a single document titled, To My Love. She froze. The title alone was enough to send a shockwave through her chest. Her hands trembled as she clicked it open, her eyes scanning the first few lines. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then I am no longer there with you. I can only imagine how difficult this must be for you. I don't want to leave you with just the memory of my absence. I need you to know how deeply I love you, and how grateful I am for every moment we shared together. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She was familiar with Jim's love letters. He had written her plenty over the years, especially when he was deployed. But this felt different. The words weren't just words of love. They were words of regret, of purpose. She felt as if she was reading a final goodbye, not just from a soldier to his wife, but from a man who had known the dangers of his work all too well. I've always been honest with you, Rebecca, but I need to tell you something now, something that I've kept from you, and I hope you'll understand why I did it. Rebecca's mind began to race. Jim had never kept secrets from her, not major ones anyway. Sure, there were things he couldn't discuss while he was on active duty, but when he was home, when they were together, there was nothing he wouldn't share with her. But this felt like it was going to be something far more significant than anything he had ever said before. I never wanted to hurt you with this, but I've kept something hidden from you because I couldn't bear to see the pain it would cause. It's about Noah. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. She felt as though the floor beneath her was crumbling. The mention of Noah, her son, was enough to make her feel unmoored. What could Jim possibly have kept from her about their son? She hadn't even noticed anything out of the ordinary. What could he have meant? You may never have suspected this, but there is something I've been working on for Noah's future, something I needed to ensure was in place, just in case the worst happened. I've been working on this for the last 2 years, even before the mission to Fallujah. I wanted to leave you with something more than memories. I wanted to make sure you and Noah would be taken care of, no matter what. Rebecca swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. What was he talking about? Jim had always been incredibly practical. He had life insurance, and there was the military pension. She knew they were taken care of financially. But Jim was always a planner, always a strategist. What had he been working on in secret? There's a trust fund for Noah. It's set up to be activated when he turns 18. The amount I've secured is more than enough for you both to live comfortably, but that's not the most important part. The true gift is a series of letters, one for every year of his life, starting with his first birthday. I've written a letter to Noah for each of his milestones, his first steps, his first day of school, his first heartbreak. And I've made arrangements for someone to deliver these letters to him on the dates I've marked. Rebecca's hands shook as she read the next part. She had to blink several times, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. Letters for Noah, every year of his life. How was that even possible? The letters are stored in a secure location, one I've arranged for you to access. You'll find them in a folder titled Noah's Letters under the file For His Future. I've made sure that you can retrieve them whenever you need them, whenever Noah needs them. These letters will guide you both through the years ahead, and they'll remind him of how much I loved him. I've written things I couldn't say to you while I was alive. Things I wanted to make sure he understood. Things I couldn't bear to leave unsaid. Rebecca's breath hitched as she read the words. The tears began to fall before she could even stop them. Jim had been planning this for years, writing letters to their son for every year of his life, to ensure that no matter where Jim was, Noah would always have a part of him. She could barely fathom the magnitude of it. It was beyond anything she could have imagined. Jim, who had always been so practical, so focused on the task at hand, had thought of everything. The letters weren't just gifts. They were a lifeline, a way for Noah to know his father, to feel connected to him even after he was gone. But there was more. I need to be honest with you, Rebecca. I haven't been truthful about something else. I've kept this secret from everyone, even from my closest comrades. But it's important that you know now, before you go looking for answers. Rebecca's fingers froze on the keyboard. What was he about to reveal? Her stomach churned with anxiety as she continued to read, her mind racing. There's another account. One I set up before I left for Iraq. It's a private account, and it's not linked to anything I shared with you before. It's a safety net, just in case. Rebecca's head spun. Another account. What was Jim talking about? Why hadn't he mentioned it? He had always been transparent with her, especially about finances. She had never known him to hide anything, let alone set up a secret account. You'll find the details for this account in the file titled For You, under a password I've given you. Use it when you're ready, Rebecca. I didn't want to leave you with nothing but the memory of a soldier who didn't come home. You and Noah deserve so much more. This account will take care of you both, not just financially, but emotionally. It's my final way of providing for you. Rebecca felt the weight of Jim's words pressing on her chest. The sense of finality was overwhelming. The love he had for her, for their son, was palpable in every sentence. And yet, there was something else, a feeling she couldn't quite put into words. It wasn't just the financial security. It wasn't just the letters or the trust fund. It was the realization that Jim had known. He had known what was at stake, what he could lose, and he had taken every measure to ensure that Rebecca and Noah wouldn't be left in the dark after his death. He had anticipated her grief, her need for closure, and he had crafted a plan to help her through it. Every detail, every piece of this hidden plan was designed to keep them safe, to help them heal, to help them find a way forward. Rebecca closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face as she gripped the edges of the laptop. Jim had thought of everything. In a way, he was still with them, still guiding them, still watching over them, even in death. She felt both overwhelmed and incredibly grateful. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, gathering the strength to continue. There was more to uncover, and she was determined to understand it all. The secret account. Rebecca sat back in the chair, staring at the screen of Jim's laptop as the weight of his words settled on her shoulders. She had always known Jim was thorough, that he thought ahead, but the lengths he had gone to ensure her and Noah's security were beyond anything she could have imagined. Letters for every year of Noah's life, a trust fund set up to protect their future, and now a secret account, a final act of love and foresight that she wasn't sure she was ready to understand fully. But the file wasn't finished. There was more. And Rebecca knew, deep down, she had to continue. If Jim had left these things for her to discover, then it was because he wanted her to be strong enough to face them. And if she was going to honor his memory, she had to see it through. With trembling hands, she clicked on the next file labeled "For You." Her mind raced with questions, the uncertainty of what was to come gnawing at her every step. Jim had been so careful, so precise with his instructions, even in death. It was as if he knew she would need something to hold on to, a thread of continuity that would bridge the gap between the life they had shared and the one she was now forced to navigate without him. The screen flickered for a moment before a new document appeared. This one was different. It wasn't just a letter. It was a set of instructions. "Rebecca, I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm sorry for that, but I need you to understand. This account is something I set up when I first became a captain. It wasn't for my personal gain, and it wasn't meant to be used unless absolutely necessary. But now, it's yours. I've made sure you'll have access to it when the time comes, and that time is now." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't realized it at first, but now, reading the words, it dawned on her just how deliberate Jim's actions had been. He had been preparing for this moment long before the fateful day when he had left for Iraq. Every decision, every financial move, every step he had taken had been a part of this intricate plan. His final plan to ensure Rebecca and Noah would never want for anything. And the most surprising part of it all was that she had no idea. Jim had never shared any of this with her. The document continued, and her eyes flitted over the words as she read them aloud, her voice a whisper in the quiet room. "This account is not tied to anything we've discussed before, and it's not something you'll find through any of our bank accounts. I've worked with a financial advisor and legal team to ensure it remains hidden, secure, and outside of any normal tracing system. I needed it to be untraceable, just in case. I hope you'll never need to use it, but I couldn't take the chance that something might happen to me, and you'd be left struggling. To access the account, you'll need the password. It's a simple phrase, but it's important you remember it, especially now that I'm gone. The password is Noah's future." Rebecca's mind was racing. Noah's future. She repeated the words in her head, etching them into her memory as if she might forget them, though she knew she wouldn't. Jim had always been clear, direct. Every word he had spoken, every letter he had written, was etched into the tapestry of their shared history. And yet, as she read further, she realized there was more, much more, to uncover. The document continued. "I've put aside a large sum of money in this account, enough to provide for you and Noah's needs for many years to come. But that's not all. This money was also invested in several assets, real estate, stocks, and bonds, that will grow over time. I've made sure that every penny is secure, and I've left instructions for how you can access it if the need arises. The key to unlocking the full potential of this account lies in the investments I've made. They're designed to grow, but you'll need guidance to make the right choices. That's where my lawyer, Grace Thompson, comes in." Rebecca paused, staring at the screen in confusion. She had never heard of this Grace Thompson. Jim had always been open with her about his financial dealings, so why had he never mentioned a lawyer? Had she been involved in the planning of this secret account? The curiosity gnawed at her. "Grace knows everything about this account. She's been handling it for me for years. She's trustworthy, Rebecca, and she's the one who can help you make the right choices with the investments I've set up. I've arranged for her to contact you when the time comes. She'll explain everything to you. And when you speak to her, know that you're not alone in this. I'll be with you, guiding you every step of the way through her." Rebecca blinked back the tears that threatened to overwhelm her. She had always known Jim was protective, that he cared deeply about her well-being. But this felt different. Jim was, in a way, still here. His voice was in these letters. His love was in every financial decision, every step he had taken to ensure she wouldn't face the world alone. And somehow, despite the gut-wrenching grief, Rebecca felt a sense of relief wash over her. Jim had provided for them. not just in the traditional sense, but in a way that transcended death. He had thought of everything. She continued reading, finding more details about the structure of the account, the specifics of the investments, and even instructions on how to manage the assets as Noah grew older. The future Jim had imagined for them was one where they would never have to worry about money, one where she could provide Noah with the best opportunities and never feel burdened by financial strain. But the more Rebecca read, the more she realized how much work it would take. This wasn't just a financial safety net. It was a puzzle, a challenge, and Jim had left it to her to solve. "There's one last thing, Rebecca. I know this won't be easy, but I want you to trust me on this. I've left instructions for a charity I've been working with in Iraq, one that's close to my heart. It's called Project Hope, and I've allocated a portion of the funds to support it. It's a program that helps children affected by the war, children who've lost everything. I need you to make sure that the money reaches them. It was always my dream to help those kids, and I hope that you'll carry that torch for me." Rebecca's eyes stung with the weight of his words. Jim had always been a man with a deep sense of justice, someone who couldn't ignore the suffering of others. And even in death, he had ensured that his work would continue. The last paragraph was the hardest to read. "Rebecca, I don't expect you to understand all of this right away. It's a lot to take in. But I trust you with my life, and with Noah's future. Please, don't let this account define you or become a burden. It's there when you need it. But remember, the most important thing is the life we built together, the love we shared, and the way we raised Noah. That's what matters most. That's what I want you to carry with you." Rebecca closed the laptop slowly, her hands trembling as she did. The room felt like it was closing in on her. She hadn't expected any of this. This hidden world Jim had created in anticipation of his death. The trust, the investments, the charity work. Everything was so meticulously planned. But what struck her the most was the love that had poured into every detail. Jim hadn't just left her with security. He had left her with a legacy that was now her responsibility to protect and honor. For the first time since Jim's death, Rebecca felt something other than grief. She felt a surge of purpose. She had been handed the tools to rebuild, to forge ahead, and to provide for Noah in a way that Jim had always hoped for. And though she didn't have all the answers yet, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone. Jim had left her everything she needed to carry on. Grace Thompson. The weight of Jim's secret account and the responsibilities he had entrusted to her continued to press down on Rebecca as she sat in the quiet of their living room. The words of the last letter echoed in her mind, still fresh, still new. "I trust you with my life, and with Noah's future." Her hands rested on her lap, fingers absently tracing the edge of the laptop. The feeling of being overwhelmed hadn't subsided. In fact, it had only deepened. Jim had gone to such lengths to plan for their future. Letters for Noah, an untraceable account, real estate investments, charity donations. All of it seemed so beyond what she could have ever expected. It was like she had been given a treasure chest of promises, each piece of it a reminder of Jim's deep love for her and their son. And yet, with the treasure came a responsibility she wasn't sure she was ready for. "I trust you." Those 3 words kept reverberating in her mind. Jim had trusted her to manage everything he had left behind. And now, as she sat with the knowledge of the account and all its implications, she realized that it wasn't just the money or the investments that she had to manage. It was also the life Jim had envisioned for Noah, the life Jim had hoped for them both. With a slow, steadying breath, Rebecca opened the file again, skimming over the details about Grace Thompson, the lawyer Jim had mentioned, the one who was to help her with the assets. The name meant nothing to her, but it was clear that Grace had been more than just a lawyer. She was someone Jim had trusted implicitly, someone who had been there behind the scenes, handling the intricate details of Jim's final arrangements. Rebecca hadn't planned on contacting Grace just yet. The sheer weight of what Jim had left behind required time to process, and there was still so much to understand. But it had been 2 days since she had first opened the file, and Rebecca felt a gnawing sense of urgency. The letters for Noel, the accounts, the charity, all of it was too important to be left untouched. If she was going to move forward with this, if she was going to honor Jim's wishes, then she needed help. She needed Grace. So, with a sense of determination that surprised her, Rebecca picked up the phone and dialed the number Jim had left in the file for her. It rang 3 times before a voice on the other end answered. "This is Grace Thompson. How may I help you?" Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. It was her, Jim's trusted lawyer, the one who held the key to unlocking everything Jim had worked for. For a moment, Rebecca didn't know what to say. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, yet there was something in the way Grace spoke that made Rebecca feel as though she had just stepped into a new chapter of her life. "This is Rebecca Carter," she said, her voice wavering slightly as she introduced herself. I'm Jim Carter's wife." "I know who you are, Mrs. Carter," Grace responded gently, as though she had been expecting the call. "I've been waiting for you to contact me. I'm so sorry for your loss. Jim spoke very highly of you." Rebecca's throat tightened at the mention of Jim's name. How many times had she heard those words? "I'm so sorry for your loss." They were starting to feel like a weight in and of themselves, something that could never be fully borne. But she pushed it down, focusing on the task at hand. I found the file. Grace. The one with the account and the letters for Noel. Jim planned everything, didn't he?" "Yes," Grace said quietly. "Jim was very thorough, very meticulous about his plans. He cared deeply for you and Noel. He knew that his time could come unexpectedly, and he wanted to make sure that you were both taken care of. That's why I've been involved. It's why everything is in place the way it is." Rebecca swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. There was so much to process, so much she didn't understand. "I've read the instructions, and I'm not sure what to do next. I don't know how to begin." Grace's voice softened further, and Rebecca could hear the empathy in her words. "I understand, Rebecca, and I know it's overwhelming. But Jim made sure everything was clear, and that's where I come in. We'll go over everything step by step. But first, let's talk about the trust fund, the investments Jim made, and the account he set up." Rebecca nodded. Even though Grace couldn't see her, she had already seen the basics, the password, the instructions, the amount of money Jim had set aside for Noah's future. But the specifics of the investments, the legal structures behind them, were still a mystery to her. She needed help to make sense of it all. "I'm ready," Rebecca said, her voice steadying as the realization set in that she couldn't do this alone. "Please, help me understand what Jim left behind." Grace paused for a moment, and when she spoke again, her tone shifted, becoming both professional and reassuring. "The first step, Rebecca, is to understand that Jim had a clear vision for Noah's future. The money, the investments, they were never just about providing for you financially. Jim wanted Noah to have every opportunity to succeed in life, no matter what path he chose. That's why the investments are in carefully selected assets, ones that will grow over time. The trust fund isn't just a safety net. It's a way to ensure that Noah will have options when he reaches adulthood." Rebecca's mind raced. "So what kind of assets are we talking about? Real estate, stocks, bonds?" "Exactly," Grace answered. Jim worked with a financial advisor to ensure that the investments would be diversified. There are properties in several key locations, commercial real estate, rental properties, and the rest is invested in stocks and bonds that Jim believed would offer a safe return over time. He was very careful in choosing these assets. He didn't want to take unnecessary risks with Noah's future. Rebecca took in a deep breath. "I had no idea Jim had made these kinds of investments. It's like he thought of everything." "He did," Grace said. "Jim had a unique way of thinking about the future. And this wasn't just about securing Noah's financial future. It was also about providing opportunities. There are also plans in place to help with Noah's education, his living expenses, and even funds for him to start his own business, if that's something he wants to do later in life. Rebecca let the words sink in. Jim had set this up not just for their survival, but for their success. He had created a foundation for Noah's life, one that would enable him to thrive. And even though Jim wasn't there to see it through, Rebecca realized that she had the power to make it a reality. "There's one more thing, Rebecca," Grace said, interrupting her thoughts. "I need to meet with you in person. There are legal documents to sign, and I want to go over everything with you in detail. It's important that we get everything in place as soon as possible, so you and Noah can move forward without any complications." Rebecca felt the weight of the responsibility in Grace's words. The journey ahead wasn't going to be easy. But now, at least, she had a clear direction. She had someone to guide her, and Jim had given her all the tools she needed to make it work. "When would be a good time for us to meet?" Rebecca asked, feeling a surge of determination. "I'll arrange it for this week," Grace said. "I know this is a lot to handle, but I promise, Rebecca, we'll take it one step at a time. We'll get through this together." Rebecca closed her eyes, taking in a deep breath. For the first time since Jim's death, she felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't going to be easy, but she was no longer alone in this. Jim's love, his planning, and now Grace's guidance were all there to help her navigate the difficult path ahead. The first steps toward the future. The days that followed Rebecca's phone call with Grace Thompson felt like a blur. It was as though she had stepped into a new reality, one where Jim's careful plans and foresight had become her sole focus. The weight of his decisions, the responsibility of seeing them through, was immense. But with Grace by her side, Rebecca felt a sense of direction that had been missing since the day Jim was taken from her. Grace had arranged to meet Rebecca in person a few days after their call, at the law office where Jim had worked with her to set up the secret account and investments. Rebecca had spent hours over the last few days reviewing the documents Jim had left behind, trying to familiarize herself with the complexities of his plan. She had seen the basic structure, the trust, the letters for Noah, the charity donation, and she had understood the financial components in theory. But the actual execution was a different matter. And so, she prepared herself for the meeting, knowing it was time to take the next step. The office was quiet when Rebecca arrived, tucked away in a corner of the city, away from the bustling streets. She stepped inside, her heart racing as she approached the receptionist. After a few moments, Grace appeared in the doorway of the conference room, smiling warmly as she extended her hand. "Mrs. Carter," Grace said, her voice both professional and gentle, "it's good to finally meet you in person. Please, call me Rebecca," she replied, shaking Grace's hand. "Thank you for helping me with all of this. I don't even know where to begin." Grace smiled, guiding Rebecca into the conference room. The space was bright and clean, with a large wooden table in the center and shelves lined with legal books and files. A large painting of a tranquil landscape hung on the wall, an odd contrast to the weighty decisions that would be made in this very room. "Let's start with the basics," Grace said, sitting across from Rebecca as she opened a file on the table. "You've seen the initial documents I sent, correct? The instructions Jim left behind, the passwords, the files detailing the investments." Rebecca nodded. She had spent hours reading through everything Jim had written, but it had been hard to keep track of it all. There were so many pieces to this puzzle, and she wasn't sure how to fit them together. "Jim was very specific about how everything should be handled," Grace continued. "He didn't want to leave you with just a financial cushion. He wanted you and Noah to have a future that was secure, but also one that was meaningful. This isn't just about money. It's about purpose." Rebecca looked at Grace, trying to understand. "Purpose?" "Yes," Grace said, leaning forward. "Jim believed in the power of legacy. He didn't just want to provide for you financially. He wanted to create opportunities for Noah, to ensure that he could pursue whatever path he chose. And that's why he invested in both tangible assets and long-term opportunities, including real estate, education, and even a small business fund for Noah when the time comes. Rebecca let out a deep breath. I knew Jim was always looking out for us, but I didn't realize how much he had set up. It feels overwhelming, honestly. It's understandable, Grace replied. But you're not alone in this, Rebecca. Jim's plan is detailed, but it's also flexible. The idea was to give you both the freedom to make choices, to take opportunities when they arise, while ensuring that you never have to worry about your future. Jim didn't want you to feel burdened by his death. He wanted you to live, to move forward, and to find happiness. Rebecca felt a pang in her chest at the words. Jim's intentions had always been clear to her, but hearing them articulated by someone else made them feel more real. It was almost as if he had left behind a blueprint for her life, one that would help her navigate this new world without him. So, what do I need to do next? She asked, trying to focus on the practical steps. Grace opened a new file on her tablet and began to walk Rebecca through the specifics. The first thing we need to address is the real estate. Jim invested in several properties, all of which are generating rental income. The properties are spread across different states, but Jim ensured that each one was well maintained and managed by trusted agents. There's no immediate action required on your part, but you'll need to review the property portfolios and decide if you want to keep them as is or sell some off for liquidity. Rebecca nodded, absorbing the information. She had always known about Jim's interest in real estate. He had talked about it occasionally, but it hadn't been something she'd ever paid much attention to. Now it seemed like the foundation of their future. The income from these properties could help secure their financial stability for years to come. Next, Grace continued, is the investment portfolio. Jim made a series of moves in the stock market, diversifying the risk and ensuring the returns were steady. He also placed funds into several bonds with long-term maturity dates. These assets will continue to grow, but you'll need to start learning about them to ensure you can make informed decisions down the line. I'll help you with that. Rebecca was starting to feel a little more at ease. Jim had clearly made sure that there would be no shortage of resources, but still, the responsibility felt huge. She wasn't a financial expert. She had never needed to be before. And yet here she was, taking on this monumental task. Grace, sensing Rebecca's unease, offered her a reassuring smile. We'll take this one step at a time. I'm here to guide you through all of it. First, let's go over the most immediate tasks: filing the appropriate legal documents, setting up accounts for Noah's education fund, and reviewing the trust that Jim created. Rebecca felt a knot in her stomach loosen as Grace outlined the practical steps. Jim had left everything in place, every detail accounted for, and it was up to her to follow through. She didn't have to figure it all out at once. Grace would be there to guide her. I don't want to rush this, Rebecca said quietly. I just want to make sure I'm doing the right thing for Noah, that I'm honoring Jim's wishes properly. You will, Grace assured her. Jim's greatest wish was for you and Noah to have the freedom to live your lives to the fullest, even without him. That's why he set everything up the way he did. He didn't want you to feel lost or stuck. He wanted you to move forward with purpose, with hope. Rebecca felt the tears welling in her eyes again, but this time, they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude. She realized that despite the immense loss, Jim had given her a gift, a clear path forward. The meeting continued for hours as Grace walked Rebecca through the various steps required to activate the trust fund, set up Noah's education account, and connect with the real estate agents managing Jim's properties. Each document Rebecca signed felt like a small piece of Jim's legacy being passed to her, and the weight of it all was both humbling and empowering. By the time the meeting concluded, Rebecca felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The fog that had clouded her mind for weeks was beginning to lift, and she could see a path forward, one that was still steeped in grief, but also filled with possibility. She wasn't alone in this journey. Jim had made sure of that. As Rebecca left the office, The sky outside was tinged with the warm glow of the setting sun. She paused for a moment, taking in the view, and for the first time in months, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about building a future, about taking the gifts Jim had left behind and using them to create something meaningful. She had a long road ahead of her, but now she had the tools and the support to walk it. Building a future. The weeks that followed Rebecca's meeting with Grace Thompson were filled with paperwork, phone calls, and decisions. Each day, she took another step toward understanding the vast web of plans Jim had left behind. It felt like the world she had once known. Her life with Jim, their shared dreams, their plans for the future, was slipping further away, replaced by a new reality she had never expected to face. But as each task was completed, as she moved through the motions of activating Jim's trust fund, managing his investments, and setting up Noah's education accounts, something began to shift within her. She no longer felt lost in the overwhelming weight of responsibility. With each legal document signed, with each investment choice made, she was slowly starting to rebuild, not just financially, but emotionally. Jim had given her the tools, and now it was up to her to use them to create a life that honored him, a life that would ensure Noah's future was as bright as Jim had envisioned. She could feel the weight of it, the pressure to make the right choices, but it was no longer something that paralyzed her. It was a challenge, one she was determined to face. As autumn settled over their small home in Virginia, Rebecca began to feel a sense of control returning. The nights were still the hardest, the quiet house echoing with the absence of Jim's voice, the small, familiar sounds of his presence now forever gone. But during the day, with Noah at her side, and the weight of Jim's love surrounding her, Rebecca found herself slowly adjusting to the rhythm of this new life. One of the first decisions she had to make was about the properties Jim had invested in. There were 6 properties in total, spread across 3 states. Some were residential rentals, others were commercial buildings that brought in a steady income. Rebecca had no experience managing real estate, but Jim had taken the time to ensure that trusted agents were handling the day-to-day operations. Still, she needed to understand what she was managing before she could make any decisions. Rebecca found herself spending hours on the phone with the property managers, going over the details of each asset. It wasn't easy. There were forms to sign, tax information to review, and a mountain of correspondence to sift through. But she took it one step at a time, reminding herself that Jim had planned for her to be able to manage it all, even if she didn't feel ready at first. Noah, who had just turned 2, seemed to grow up before her eyes in those early months after Jim's death. She couldn't help but see Jim in his bright blue eyes, in the way his small hands reached out for her, in his quiet laughter as he discovered the world around him. Every day, she was reminded of Jim's love for their son, and it pushed her to keep going. She wanted to make sure Noah grew up surrounded by the security and opportunity Jim had dreamed of for him. One rainy afternoon, as she sat in the living room sorting through more paperwork, Noah toddled up to her with one of Jim's old books in hand. It was a small, weathered book of poems, the one Jim used to read to him every night before bed. Rebecca smiled softly as Noah handed her the book, his tiny voice trying to say the words Jim had always spoken so lovingly. "Read, Mommy," Noah said, his words still a little slurred, but filled with determination. Rebecca took the book from him, her heart aching at the memory of Jim reading those same poems to their son, his deep voice soothing Noah to sleep. She opened the book and began to read the first poem aloud. The words seemed to wrap around her, comforting her as she read, reminding her that Jim's presence was still there, in the little things. His love was still alive in the way Noah's small hands reached for her, in the way the house smelled when she made dinner, in the quiet moments like this, when everything felt still and the world outside seemed far away. That night, after Noah was asleep, Rebecca sat down again at the kitchen table, her mind turning over the details of Jim's plan. The investments, the properties, the charities, everything was moving forward. But there was one part of Jim's legacy that she hadn't fully explored yet. The charity he had supported so passionately, the one he had invested in during his time in Iraq, was something she hadn't been able to look at in detail. Jim had left specific instructions for her to continue supporting Project Hope, a program that helped children who had been orphaned or displaced by the war. He had allocated a portion of his trust fund to this cause, and Rebecca knew it was her responsibility to carry it on. The next morning, after Noah had his breakfast and was happily playing in the living room, Rebecca reached out to the contact Jim had listed in the file. Sami Ahmed, the director of Project Hope. She dialed the number, her fingers trembling as she waited for someone to answer. The phone rang several times before a voice on the other end picked up. "Hello?" a man's voice asked, strong yet kind. "Hello, is this Sami Ahmed?" Rebecca asked, her voice tentative. "My name is Rebecca Carter. I'm Jim Carter's wife. I'm reaching out because Jim left instructions for me to continue his support of Project Hope." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Carter," Sami said, his voice filled with emotion, "I am so sorry for your loss. Jim was an incredible man. He did so much for us, for these children. You are truly carrying on a legacy that means the world to us." Rebecca felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to Sami's words. She had known that Jim's work with the charity was important to him, but hearing the passion in Sami's voice made it clear just how much of a difference Jim had made. "Thank you," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion. "Jim wanted me to continue his work. I have some questions about how the donations are being used, how we can expand the program. I want to make sure that what he set up is being used in the best way possible." Sami seemed eager to share. "Of course, Mrs. Carter. Jim worked tirelessly to create sustainable solutions for the children. His donation has allowed us to build safe spaces for the children, offer educational programs, and provide medical care. But there's always more that can be done. We're in the process of expanding our outreach, and your support will help us reach more children who are in desperate need." Rebecca listened intently, feeling a deep sense of pride as she learned about the ongoing work Jim had supported. The money Jim had allocated wasn't just being used for temporary aid. It was being used to build a future for the children of war, just as Jim had hoped. Before the call ended, Sami said, "Mrs. Carter, there's an opportunity to take the program even further. We've been working on a partnership with several organizations to build a new community center for displaced families. Jim had expressed interest in helping fund that project. If you're willing, we could use your support to get it off the ground." Rebecca's heart swelled with emotion. This was Jim's legacy, not just in the money he had left behind, but in the difference he had made in the lives of so many people. And now, with that same legacy in her hands, Rebecca knew what she had to do. "I'll make sure the funds are allocated for this," Rebecca said firmly. "Jim believed in this program, and I will see it through. I want to carry on his work, Sami. I want to help these children just like Jim did." The conversation ended with plans to meet in person in the coming weeks, and Rebecca felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just managing Jim's investments or fulfilling legal obligations. She was building something meaningful, something that would last. With Noah's future secured, and Jim's dream of helping children in need continuing, Rebecca could finally see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving, about carrying Jim's legacy forward into a future filled with hope and opportunity. As she hung up the phone, she looked across the room at Noah, playing happily with his toys. Jim had given her everything she needed to succeed, not just for herself, but for their son. And for the first time since his death, Rebecca felt a true sense of peace. She was moving forward, and she wasn't alone.